Wisdom had once been a man of high status, a respected bank manager with a promising future. He lived comfortably, enjoying the rewards of his hard work and dedication. With a stable career, a beautiful home, and a family that depended on him, he had everything he could have ever wished for. But life, unpredictable and cruel, had other plans. One fateful Monday morning, Wisdom arrived at his office as usual, expecting just another day of work. Instead, he was greeted with a letter on his desk, a termination notice. Confused and shaken, he read the accusations against him: embezzlement and financial misconduct. It was a crushing blow. He had never stolen a dime, yet the evidence seemed stacked against him. His protests fell on deaf ears. The bank's decision was final. As the weight of the situation settled in, things only got worse. His bank accounts were immediately frozen, leaving him with no access to his money. Within days, his home, cars, and all valuable assets were seized. The very institution he had dedicated years of his life to had stripped him of everything. Overnight, he went from a successful professional to a man with nothing. The news of his downfall spread quickly, and the once admired Wisdom became the subject of whispers and judgment. Friends distanced themselves, and colleagues who once respected him now looked at him with suspicion. His world collapsed, leaving him humiliated and powerless. But what hurt the most was seeing the disappointment in the eyes of his family. At home, the tension was unbearable. His wife, Belinda, who had once basked in the luxury he provided, grew resentful and bitter. She did not care about his innocence, only about the fact that their lavish lifestyle had come to an abrupt end. She blamed him mercilessly, constantly reminding him of what he had lost and how he had failed their family. Each day, she cursed his misfortune, making it clear that she had no intention of standing by him through hard times. With no job, no income, and no support, Wisdom was left with only one option: survival. As the days passed and the weight of unpaid bills and hunger loomed over him, he had no choice but to take up the humiliating job of pushing a wheelbarrow in the bustling streets. The same hands that once signed important financial documents now clutched onto the rusty handles of an old barrow. The same man who once sat in air-conditioned offices now trudged through dusty roads, hauling goods for small wages. People who once greeted him with respect now mocked and pitied him. Strangers whispered behind his back, former associates avoided eye contact, and those who once envied him now laughed at his misery. Wisdom had lost everything: his career, his dignity, and the life he had built. But deep inside, a small ember of hope still burned. Losing his job and wealth was devastating, but nothing could have prepared Wisdom for the betrayal that followed. He had always believed that, no matter what, his family would stand by him, but he was wrong. The people he trusted the most, his wife, Belinda, and his younger brother Victor, would turn their backs on him in the cruelest way imaginable. At first, Belinda's anger and frustration seemed understandable. They had lost everything overnight: their house, their cars, their comfortable life. But instead of standing by her husband and helping him through the hardship, she became hostile, cruel, and impatient. She constantly belittled him, reminding him every day of how far he had fallen. "Look at you," she would sneer, arms crossed, watching him return home after a long day of pushing a wheelbarrow through the streets. From a bank manager to a common laborer, "How do you expect me to live like this?" Her resentment festered, turning into open contempt. She refused to cook for him, refused to even acknowledge his efforts to provide for their family. What little money he earned from pushing the barrow was never enough for her. The love and respect they once shared had been replaced by scorn and bitterness. But her betrayal did not stop at words. One evening, exhausted from a long day of work, Wisdom returned home only to find their house eerily quiet. His sons were there, hungry and confused, but Belinda was nowhere to be found. She had left. Days turned into weeks, and still she did not return. She had abandoned them, her own children, without a second thought, choosing to chase the luxuries she had lost rather than fight for her family. But where had she gone? The answer came as a devastating shock. Desperate and broken, Wisdom went to his younger brother Victor's house, hoping for support. He knew Victor had always admired him, even relied on him in the past. Surely, he would understand his suffering and help, even just a little. But the moment he stepped into Victor's home, his world shattered completely. There, in his brother's bedroom, lay Belinda, his wife, in an intimate embrace with Victor. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Victor didn't even bother to act ashamed. Instead, he sat up in bed, smirking. "Get out, lazy man," Victor sneered. "You have nothing left to offer. You're worthless." Belinda, completely unbothered, rolled her eyes. "Why are you still here?" she hissed. The pain was unbearable. Wisdom staggered backward, his stomach twisting, his vision blurring with tears. His wife, the woman he had once loved, and his own brother, the very person he had trusted the most, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. They had taken everything from him. His dignity, his family, his heart. As Wisdom struggled to survive, pushing his wheelbarrow through the streets just to make a few coins, he couldn't help but wonder how Victor had become so wealthy overnight. It made no sense. Just a few months ago, Victor had been a struggling university student with barely enough money to afford rent. Now, he lived in a lavish mansion, drove the latest luxury cars, and dressed in expensive designer suits. People whispered about his sudden rise, but no one dared question it openly. At first, Wisdom tried to ignore it. He had bigger problems. His children were starving, his rent was overdue, and every day felt like a battle just to survive. But as time went on, the mystery of Victor's wealth began to gnaw at him. He heard market traders gossiping, their voices filled with suspicion. "Victor built that mansion in just 6 months," one woman whispered. "I heard he made his money through dark means," another replied. The words sent a chill down Wisdom's spine. Could there be truth to the rumors? Could Victor's wealth be connected to something more sinister? One evening, as Wisdom lay on the thin mat in his tiny room, he replayed everything in his mind: the betrayal, Victor's arrogance, his sudden success. It all seemed too convenient. The next morning, determined to find answers, Wisdom made his way to Victor's mansion. When he arrived at the tall iron gates, 2 armed security guards stopped him. "Who are you here to see?" one asked. "Victor." "I'm his brother," Wisdom replied firmly. The guards exchanged glances before one of them finally went inside. A few minutes later, Victor appeared, dressed in gold jewelry and a designer suit, his face twisted into a mocking smile. "What do you want now?" Victor asked, his tone dripping with annoyance. Wisdom took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "I need the truth, Victor. What did you do to become so rich? Why did my life fall apart the moment yours improved?" Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You wouldn't understand, Wisdom," he whispered. "Life is about survival. Some of us are willing to do whatever it takes to rise above the rest." "What are you talking about?" Wisdom demanded. Victor leaned in, his eyes glinting with something dark. "Your life, your destiny. It was the price I paid for my success. You should be honored, really. Thanks to you, I have everything I ever wanted." Wisdom staggered backward, his heart pounding in his chest. The words cut through him like a knife. "You sacrifice me?" he whispered in disbelief. Victor shrugged, a cruel smile on his lips. "You always had everything handed to you: good job, beautiful family, respect. It was my turn to shine." Fury boiled within Wisdom. This was no accident. His downfall had been orchestrated. "You destroyed my life. My children are suffering because of you." Victor laughed coldly. "That's not my problem. Now, if you're done wasting my time, get out of here." As Wisdom turned to leave, Belinda appeared, dressed in expensive clothes and dripping with jewelry. She looked at him with disgust. "Still begging, I see," she sneered. Wisdom didn't respond. He walked away, his heart filled with rage and despair. But deep inside, a new determination began to form. He would not let Victor win. As days turned into weeks, Wisdom struggled to make ends meet. The meager money he earned from pushing a wheelbarrow was barely enough to buy food, let alone pay school fees or rent. His 2 young sons, Emmanuel and David, often went to bed hungry, their once bright laughter replaced by silent suffering. One day, the school sent them home because their fees were unpaid. Wisdom's heart shattered as he saw their sad little faces, knowing he had failed them. Then came an eviction notice from the landlord. He had just 3 days to leave if he couldn't pay. The pressure was unbearable. Desperate, Wisdom swallowed his pride and went to Victor one last time. He wasn't asking for much, just a little help to keep his children in school. But when he arrived at Victor's mansion, the humiliation only deepened. "Do I look like your bank thief?" Victor spat, his tone filled with contempt. Belinda, now fully embracing her new life of wealth, emerged from the bedroom, rolling her eyes at the sight of her former husband. "Why are you still here?" she sneered. Without hesitation, Victor pulled out his phone and transferred a large sum of money into Belinda's account, right in front of Wisdom. The message tone confirmed the transaction. Wisdom stood there, tears streaming down his face, watching the woman who had once been his wife smirk in satisfaction while he begged for help. Victor shoved him aside without a second thought. "Get out of my house." Wisdom left, his heart weighed down by sorrow and betrayal, unaware that something far more sinister was unfolding behind the scenes. Victor's dark ritual. Unbeknownst to Wisdom, Victor's wealth had come at a terrible cost. His rise to power wasn't luck, it was a carefully orchestrated sacrifice. The cult he had joined demanded more than just Wisdom's destiny. The Grand Master of the cult had warned Victor that as long as Wisdom was alive, his persistent questioning could threaten everything. There was only one way to guarantee Victor's wealth would remain intact. "A greater sacrifice must be made," the Grand Master declared. His children. Victor hesitated only for a moment. Then his greed overpowered his guilt. "Do it," he said. That night, Victor stood outside Wisdom's humble home, clutching a small clay pot filled with a dark mixture of ashes, blood, and strange herbs. He muttered the Grand Master's incantation and poured the mixture into the footprints of Emmanuel and David. A cold wind swept through the yard as the ritual was completed. A father's worst nightmare. The next morning, Wisdom woke up early, calling out to his sons. "Emmanuel! David! Time to wake up." Silence. He walked to their small bed and gently shook them. "Wake up, my boys, it's morning." But they didn't stir. A deep sense of dread gripped Wisdom as he touched their faces cold, lifeless. "No, no," he cried, shaking them harder. Realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His sons were gone. He screamed for help, running to his neighbors, pleading, "Please, somebody help me. My children won't wake up." A local doctor arrived moments later, but it was too late. He placed a hand on Wisdom's shoulder and shook his head. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Wisdom fell to his knees, clutching his children's tiny hands, his wails of agony piercing the morning air. "Why? Why them? God, they were innocent." Hours passed, but Wisdom refused to let go of their lifeless bodies. The memories of their laughter, their dreams, everything was gone. By sunset, with trembling hands, he buried them with nothing but his tears soaking the earth. As the last handful of dirt covered their graves, he whispered, "You were my world. Forgive me for failing you." But as night fell, something inside him changed. His sorrow turned to rage. Victor had taken everything from him, his dignity, his family, and now his children. Wisdom clenched his fists. "You will not go unpunished." Days passed after the devastating loss of his children, but for Wisdom, time had lost all meaning. His once lively home was now just an empty, silent space filled with unbearable grief. He barely ate, barely spoke, and each night he lay on the cold floor crying himself to sleep. One evening, as he pushed his wheelbarrow through the busy market, his body weak from hunger and exhaustion, he overheard a conversation that would change his life. Two traders stood nearby, gossiping about Victor's sudden rise to wealth. "Did you hear how Victor built a mansion in just 6 months?" one said. "Yes, and he drives the latest cars too," the other replied. "People say he made his fortune through dark means." The words sent a chill down Wisdom's spine. He had always wondered how Victor, once a struggling student, had become so wealthy while his own life had crumbled overnight. Now, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. As he walked home that night, his mind raced. The betrayal, the suffering, the unexplained deaths of his sons, was Victor truly behind it all? But before he could act, fate intervened. A fateful encounter. The next day, Wisdom was walking along a dusty road, lost in thought, when he noticed a commotion ahead. A group of rough-looking young men had surrounded an old man clutching a leather bag. "Please, leave me alone. Don't take my bag," the old man pleaded. The thugs laughed mockingly, tugging at his belongings. Without hesitation, Wisdom ran toward them. "Hey! Leave him alone," he shouted. The gang turned, sneering at him. "Who do you think you are?" one of them spat. But Wisdom didn't back down. He grabbed a wooden stick lying nearby and swung it toward them fiercely. "I said, leave him alone." His voice carried such force that the gang hesitated. After exchanging quick glances, they decided it wasn't worth the fight and ran off, cursing under their breath. Wisdom turned to the old man, who was shaking from fear but unharmed. "Are you all right, sir?" Wisdom asked gently. The man nodded, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, my son. You saved me. May God bless you." Wisdom smiled faintly. "I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt you." As the old man straightened his jacket, he took a closer look at Wisdom. "What is your name, young man?" "Wisdom, sir," he replied. The man's eyes lit up with recognition. "Wisdom," he repeated thoughtfully. "You have a brave and kind heart. My name is Chief Wellington. I am the CEO of Wellington Estates and Wellington Bank." Wisdom's eyes widened in shock. He had heard of Chief Wellington, a powerful businessman known throughout the city. But never in his wildest dreams did he think he would meet him, let alone save him. Chief Wellington reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "Take this," he said, handing it to Wisdom. "Come to my house this weekend. I want to know more about you and see how I can help." Wisdom stared at the card in disbelief. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Chief Wellington smiled warmly. "No, my son. It is I who must thank you." He stepped into his waiting car and was driven away, leaving Wisdom standing on the roadside, gripping the card as if it were a priceless treasure. For the first time in years, a flicker of hope lit up in his heart. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Please, let this be the beginning of my breakthrough." As Wisdom's life began to take a turn for the better, Victor's world started to crumble. At first, he didn't notice its small things, like losing money without explanation or feeling a strange unease at night. But as weeks passed, the signs became impossible to ignore. The money that once overflowed his house began disappearing mysteriously. Bundles of cash that were once stacked high in his bedroom were now dwindling at an alarming rate. His investments failed, his business deals fell apart, and his charm, once his greatest weapon, no longer worked on people. Victor panicked. This wasn't supposed to happen. Desperate, he summoned the Wise One, the dark figure who had promised him wealth in exchange for his brother's destiny. As the room filled with a sinister aura, the Wise One appeared in a cloud of smoke, his glowing eyes fixed on Victor. "You promised me endless wealth," Victor shouted, his voice trembling with frustration. The Wise One's voice was calm yet ominous. "I gave you your brother's destiny, but now there is a stronger force protecting him. A divine power shields him from harm." Victor's heart pounded in fear. "Stronger force? How? I thought I took everything from him." The Wise One sneered. "You are losing because he no longer walks alone. If you want to regain your wealth and power, there is only one way left." Victor's breath caught in his throat. "What must I do?" The Wise One stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the room. "Kill him." For the first time, Victor hesitated. He had stolen from Wisdom, betrayed him, even sacrificed his children, but murder. Then greed drowned out his hesitation. "Tell me what to do," he said coldly. The Wise One handed him a list of instructions. "Perform the sacrifice tonight. Call Wisdom's name 3 times, but be warned if anything happens to you during the ritual, you are on your own." Victor didn't care. He was too desperate. That night, he followed every step carefully. He lit the candles, spread the offerings, and stood before the altar of darkness, clutching a ceremonial dagger. His voice trembled as he called out, "Wisdom, wisdom, wisdom." The moment the third call left his lips, a deafening thunderclap shook the ground. The walls trembled, the candles flickered violently, and suddenly a bolt of lightning struck Victor directly. His scream of agony filled the night. His body convulsed as a dark force surged through him, twisting his mind, consuming his soul. When the storm settled, Victor lay on the ground, his eyes wild and unfocused. He had lost more than just his wealth. His mind was gone. The madness begin. In the weeks that followed, Victor wandered the streets like a madman, muttering to himself, laughing at nothing, covered in filth. His once pristine suits were now torn and ragged. The man who had once been feared and admired was now a shell of his former self. One afternoon, Wisdom saw him. He was at a mechanic shop waiting for his car to be fixed when he noticed a dirty, disheveled figure staggering toward him. When the man got closer, Wisdom's heart skipped a beat. "Victor?" he whispered in disbelief. Victor's wild eyes locked onto his brother. Brother," he shouted hysterically. "They tricked me. I was jealous of you. I stole your destiny, but now they have abandoned me." Wisdom staggered back, his mind reeling from the confession. You did this to me. You destroyed my life." Victor fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Forgive me, brother. I was wrong. I was blinded by greed, but now I have lost everything." Before Wisdom could respond, Victor suddenly bolted into the road, his madness driving him into oncoming traffic. A speeding car appeared out of nowhere. Bam! Victor's body flew into the air and landed with a sickening thud. Wisdom rushed to his brother's side, his hands trembling. Victor lay lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The streets fell silent as onlookers watched in horror. The driver stepped out, shaking in fear. "I didn't see him. He just ran into the road." Wisdom knelt beside his fallen brother, his eyes brimming with tears. "Victor, why?" he whispered. "The weight of the past, the betrayal, the suffering, it all ended here." As the crowd murmured, Wisdom looked up at the sky. "Lord, I don't understand, but I leave everything in your hands. Help me to heal from this pain." He stood up, wiping his tears. Victor had paid the ultimate price for his greed. Now, Wisdom could finally move forward. Brother, he shouted hysterically. "They tricked me. I was jealous of you. I stole your destiny, but now they have abandoned me." Wisdom staggered back, his mind reeling from the confession. You did this to me. You destroyed my life." Victor fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Forgive me, brother. I was wrong. I was blinded by greed, but now I have lost everything." Before Wisdom could respond, Victor suddenly bolted into the road, his madness driving him into oncoming traffic. A speeding car appeared out of nowhere. Bam! Victor's body flew into the air and landed with a sickening thud. Wisdom rushed to his brother's side, his hands trembling. Victor lay lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The streets fell silent as onlookers watched in horror. The driver stepped out, shaking in fear. "I didn't see him. He just ran into the road." Wisdom knelt beside his fallen brother, his eyes brimming with tears. "Victor, why?" he whispered. "The weight of the past, the betrayal, the suffering, it all ended here." As the crowd murmured, Wisdom looked up at the sky. "Lord, I don't understand, but I leave everything in your hands. Help me to heal from this pain." He stood up, wiping his tears. Victor had paid the ultimate price for his greed. Now, Wisdom could finally move forward. 1 year had passed since Victor's tragic demise, and Wisdom's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. From a man who had once pushed a wheelbarrow through the streets, humiliated and broken, he now stood tall as a bank manager, respected and admired. His journey had been painful, filled with betrayal, loss, and unimaginable suffering, but in the end, justice had prevailed. With the guidance of Chief Wellington, Wisdom had rebuilt his life from the ground up. The same hands that once gripped the rusty handles of a wheelbarrow now signed official documents in a polished office. The man who once begged for jobs now had employees under his leadership. But perhaps the greatest blessing of all was the love he had found in Isabella, Chief Wellington's daughter. The bond between them had grown stronger each day, and before long they stood before the altar, exchanging vows in front of friends and family. "I promise to love, cherish, and protect you, Isabella, for the rest of my life," Wisdom had said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I promise to stand by you through thick and thin," Isabella replied, tears glistening in her eyes. Their wedding was not just a celebration of love, but a testimony of Wisdom's resilience, a reminder that life could turn around when one refuses to give up. Months after their marriage, Isabella shared the most joyous news: she was pregnant. Wisdom fell to his knees in gratitude, overwhelmed by the blessing he never thought he would receive again. But God had one more surprise in store. 1. The day Isabella gave birth, Wisdom's world stood still. Not one, not two, but 3 healthy babies, 2 boys and a girl. Holding them in his arms, tears streamed down his face. "God, you are truly amazing," he whispered. As he gazed at their tiny faces, he saw Emmanuel and David in them, his sons who had been taken too soon. But now, life had come full circle. The lessons of a lifetime. Looking back, Wisdom understood that his story was more than just Wisdom could have given up. He could have allowed bitterness and hatred to consume him, but instead, he chose to hold on to faith, to keep moving forward, and to trust that his story was not over. And because of that, he won in the end. Victor's greed and betrayal led him to a tragic downfall, proving that no amount of stolen wealth can buy true peace. Belinda, too, had lost everything: her beauty, her wealth, and even her ability to have children, because she valued material things over love and loyalty. Meanwhile, Wisdom, the man who had been humiliated and cast aside, had risen from the ashes. He had gained not just wealth, but dignity, purpose, and a family that truly loved him. A message for us all. In a world where people chase money at any cost, betray friends for personal gain, and sacrifice values for temporary success, Wisdom's story reminds us of what truly matters. Wealth gained through deception will never last. Pain is temporary, but perseverance can rewrite any story. And in the end, faith, integrity, and kindness will always triumph over greed and betrayal. As Wisdom cradled his newborns in his arms, he knew one thing for certain: he had won the battle life had thrown at him. And for that, he would always be grateful.